Lucas Carter never asked to be the center of attention, especially not at Meadowbrook Academy, where wealth and status rule. As the scholarship kid, his worn clothes and old backpack make him a target for ridicule, but nothing compares to the sting of public humiliation from the school's principal. While the elite sneer, Lucas' father, Ethan, knows the truth that no one else does. This school was built on the land stolen from his family. Now, the quiet man who has spent years in the shadows must make a choice: stay silent or fight back against the institution that broke his family and is now breaking his son. As Ethan uncovers buried truths and exposes Meadowbrook's corruption, both father and son must decide what price they're willing to pay for justice. In a story where wealth and privilege clash with dignity and courage, The Price of Silence asks one powerful question: how far would you go to protect the ones you love, even if it means risking everything? The iron gates of Meadowbrook Academy loomed large as Lucas Carter stepped off the city bus. He stared up at the sprawling red brick buildings, each one more imposing than the last. Everything about the school screamed wealth, from the manicured lawns to the students who passed by, their crisp uniforms a far cry from the worn-out clothes Lucas wore. With his old backpack slung over his shoulder, Lucas took a deep breath and stepped onto the pristine grounds. He had fought hard for the scholarship that got him here, but the moment he crossed the threshold, it felt like he didn't belong. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, hoping it might somehow make him invisible to the students already staring. "Hey, who's the new kid?" someone whispered. "Must be the scholarship kid," another replied, their voice tinged with disdain. Lucas kept walking, his eyes fixed on the ground as he made his way to the main building. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He was used to not having much, but Meadowbrook Academy made him acutely aware of what he didn't have. By the time Lucas reached the assembly hall, his heart was racing. He found a seat near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. The room filled with students in immaculate uniforms, their shoes polished and their jackets adorned with the golden Meadowbrook emblem. Lucas shifted in his seat, painfully aware of how out of place he looked. The assembly began with the headmaster, Principal Waltham, taking the stage. His voice boomed through the hall, speaking of tradition, excellence, and the responsibility of upholding the school's image. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the room, finally landing on Lucas. "There are standards at Meadowbrook," Waltham said, his voice suddenly growing cold. "Standards that must be met. A uniform is not just a requirement, it's a representation of who you are. And if you cannot meet these standards, perhaps this school isn't the place for you." Every head turned toward Lucas. He felt his face flush with shame as Waltham's words cut through him. The students around him whispered, snickering as they eyed his faded clothes. Lucas sat frozen, unable to move or speak. The humiliation was suffocating. All he wanted was to disappear, but the damage was done. Principal Waltham had made it clear: Lucas didn't belong here. After the assembly, Lucas hurried through the hallway, hoping to avoid any more attention. He rounded a corner, only to find himself face-to-face with a group of boys led by Owen Hastings, the most popular kid in school. Tall, athletic, and confident, Owen looked like he belonged in every room he walked into. And he knew it. "Well, look who it is," Owen said, a smirk playing on his lips. "The scholarship kid." Lucas kept his head down, not wanting to engage. He had heard enough from Owen's type before. Kids who thought they were better just because they had money. But ignoring him wasn't an option. "Hey," Owen called out, stepping closer. "I'm talking to you." Lucas hesitated before looking up. "What do you want?" he muttered. Owen laughed, loud enough for his friends to join in. "Just wondering how long it's gonna take before you realize you don't belong here." He reached out and flicked the corner of Lucas's backpack, the fabric worn and patched in places. "This thing's older than my granddad." The boys laughed again, and Lucas clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a response, so he pushed past them, his face burning with anger and shame. Owen's voice followed him down the hall. "Better enjoy it while it lasts, Carter. You won't be here long." That evening, Lucas sat at the small, worn kitchen table of the apartment he shared with his father, Ethan. The smell of spaghetti drifted from the stove, but Lucas barely touched his plate. He couldn't shake the humiliation of the day, the sneers, the laughter. Ethan sat across from him, his face etched with the weariness of years of hard labor. He worked long hours, often late into the night, just to keep a roof over their heads. Seeing Lucas so quiet, he set his fork down. "How was your first day?" Ethan asked gently. Lucas forced a smile. "It was fine." Ethan frowned, not convinced. "You don't have to pretend, you know." "I'm not pretending," Lucas said quickly. "It's just different, that's all." Ethan studied his son's face, noticing the tension in his jaw, the way he avoided eye contact. He knew there was more to the story, but he didn't push. "You're tough, Lucas," he said after a moment. "You worked hard to get there. Just remember that." Lucas nodded, but the words didn't help. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the facade, pretending that everything was fine when he felt like he was falling apart inside. Later that night, long after Lucas had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen. His fingers drummed nervously on the old wooden table as memories from years ago came flooding back. The land that Meadowbrook Academy now stood on had once been his family's. It was supposed to be his legacy, but that legacy had been stolen, sold off under deceitful circumstances that left Ethan and his family with nothing. He had buried the pain for years, choosing instead to focus on providing for Lucas, but seeing his son suffer stirred something deep inside him. It reignited the anger and betrayal he thought he had long buried. Ethan reached up into the cupboard and pulled down a metal box. The lid creaked as he opened it, revealing yellowed documents, faded photographs, and a handful of old newspaper clippings. He hadn't looked at these in years, but tonight, he felt a pull he couldn't resist. As he sifted through the papers, one document caught his eye, a deed to the land. His family's name was still there, clear as day. Ethan stared at the paper for a long time, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He had kept this secret for too long, avoiding the fight because he didn't want to reopen old wounds. But now, watching his son endure the same humiliation and injustice that had destroyed his own life, Ethan realized that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. He folded the document carefully and placed it back in the box. His jaw tightened with resolve. "They're not going to do this to you, Lucas," Ethan whispered to himself. "Not like they did to me." The decision had been made. Tomorrow, he would confront Meadowbrook, not just for Lucas, but for the honor that had been stolen from their family. The next morning, Ethan stood outside Meadowbrook Academy, a sense of unease swirling in his chest. The grandeur of the school, its imposing iron gates and manicured lawns, reminded him of the power it wielded over his son's life and his own past. Inside the main office, Ethan approached the receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a professional smile that quickly faltered when she saw the determined look on his face. "I need to speak with Principal Waltham," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Carter?" "No, I don't. But I won't leave until I see him." The receptionist hesitated, but the steely resolve in Ethan's eyes left little room for argument. She nodded and made a quick phone call before motioning for him to take a seat. A few minutes later, Principal Waltham appeared, his tailored suit pressed and his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, what brings you here?" Ethan didn't waste any time. "I'm here to talk about Lucas. He's being bullied, and from what I understand, you're not only allowing it, you're encouraging it." Waltham raised an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Mr. Carter, Meadowbrook has high standards. If Lucas is struggling to meet those standards, it's on him. We can't lower expectations for one student." Ethan's jaw tightened. "My son earned his place here. He deserves respect like anyone else." Waltham sighed, stepping closer. "Mr. Carter, let me be blunt. Meadowbrook has a reputation to uphold. If Lucas, or any student, can't meet the expectations, we will have to reconsider his place here. Scholarships aren't permanent, after all." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air, and Ethan's blood boiled. But instead of lashing out, he kept his voice calm. "I'm not asking you to lower your standards. I'm asking you to treat my son with the respect he's earned." Waltham smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll do what we can. But I suggest you prepare Lucas for the reality of this school. Not everyone is cut out for it." Ethan stared at the principal for a moment, knowing that nothing he said would change the man's elitist mindset. But he also knew this was just the beginning. Without another word, Ethan turned and left, his mind already racing with the next step. The school hallways buzzed with their usual energy as Lucas made his way to his locker. He kept his head down, hoping to get through the day without another confrontation. But just as he reached his locker, he saw Owen Hastings and his group of friends leaning against the wall, smirking. "Hey, Carter," Owen called out, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the students around them. "I heard your dad paid a visit to the school. Trying to save your scholarship?" Lucas tensed, his hands clenching into fists as he tried to ignore them. But Owen wasn't done. "Maybe he should have bought you a new backpack while he was at it," Owen added, kicking Lucas's old, worn bag, sending it skidding across the floor. The other boys laughed, and Lucas's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Leave me alone," Lucas muttered, reaching for his backpack, but Owen stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You don't belong here, Carter," Owen said, his voice low and venomous. "Everyone knows it. Even your dad knows it." Lucas stood there, his heart pounding, fighting the urge to lash out. He could feel the eyes of the other students on him, watching, waiting to see what he would do. But before he could say anything, Owen shoved him hard, knocking him back against the lockers. Laughter erupted around them, and Lucas's vision blurred with tears of frustration and shame. "Just go home, Carter," Owen sneered. "This place isn't for people like you." Lucas didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he grabbed his bag and hurried away, the laughter still ringing in his ears. After Owen's latest attack, Lucas needed to find somewhere quiet, somewhere he could escape the constant ridicule. He wandered into the library, grateful for the silence and the rows of books that offered a temporary refuge from the harsh reality of Meadowbrook. He found a corner near the back, far away from the prying eyes of other students, and sank into a chair. For a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes, to breathe, to push the day's events out of his mind. "Hey." Lucas's eyes snapped open, startled by the soft voice. Standing in front of him was a girl around his age, with light brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She held a book in her hands, her expression hesitant but kind. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked. Lucas shrugged, still unsure who she was or why she was talking to him. "Sure." She sat down across from him, placing her book on the table but not opening it. After a few moments of awkward silence, she spoke again. "I've seen what Owen and the others have been doing to you. It's not right." Lucas looked at her, surprised. "Why do you care?" She gave a small smile. "I guess I just don't like bullies." Lucas studied her for a moment. "You're not friends with them?" She shook her head. "No. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Parker." "I'm Lucas," he said, though he was sure she already knew. They sat in silence for a moment longer before Emma spoke again. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or just someone to sit with, you can find me here. I spend a lot of time in the library." Lucas didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected anyone at this school to show him kindness, let alone offer friendship. "Thanks," he muttered, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. Emma smiled again, then opened her book and began to read. Lucas, for the first time in days, felt a small flicker of hope. That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents spread out before him. The old deed to the land Meadowbrook Academy was built on, the records of his family's ownership, the legal papers that showed how it had all been taken from them through deceitful means. He had kept these documents locked away for years, buried along with the pain of losing his family's legacy. But now, with Lucas being humiliated by the very institution that had wronged them, Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a long time. "Caleb Donovan." "Caleb, it's Ethan." "Ethan Carter." There was a brief pause before Caleb responded, his voice warm but cautious. "Ethan, it's been a long time. What can I do for you?" "I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "It's about Meadowbrook Academy. They took my family's land years ago, and now they're hurting my son." Caleb sighed, the weight of the situation clear in his voice. "I always knew you'd come back to this someday. I'll help you, Ethan. Whatever you need." Ethan closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. I need to know if we have a case. If there's anything we can do to reclaim what's ours, I'll look into it, Caleb promised. Send me everything you have, and I'll start digging. But Ethan, you need to be prepared. This fight won't be easy. Ethan nodded, even though Caleb couldn't see him. I know, but I have to do this. For Lucas. Over the next few days, Ethan and Caleb worked tirelessly, poring over every document, every scrap of evidence they could find. Caleb's legal expertise helped them piece together a case, one that could potentially prove that Meadowbrook had taken the Carter family's land illegally. Late one night, as they sifted through another stack of papers, Ethan found something that made his heart skip a beat. It was a letter, dated decades ago, from Meadowbrook's founders to the Carter family's lawyer. In it, they outlined a plan to manipulate the sale of the land, ensuring that the Carters would lose everything while the Academy profited. Ethan stared at the letter, his hands trembling. This was it, the proof they needed. Caleb, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We have them. We have the proof. Caleb looked at the letter, a slow smile spreading across his face. This changes everything, Ethan. Ethan nodded, a sense of vindication surging through him. We're going to take them down. They won't get away with this. The laughter echoed in Lucas's ears as he stood in the middle of the school courtyard, his face flushed with humiliation. Owen Hastings and his friends had struck again, this time orchestrating a particularly cruel prank. As Lucas reached for his schoolbooks, scattered across the ground, he felt the weight of every stare, every whispered insult. Come on, Carter. Don't take it so personally, Owen called out, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. Just a joke, right? Lucas gritted his teeth, refusing to give Owen the satisfaction of seeing him break. But his hands trembled as he gathered his things, his breath shallow. He couldn't take it anymore. The taunts, the bullying, it was all becoming too much. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but he didn't know how. Later that afternoon, when Lucas returned home, the weight of the day crashed down on him. As soon as he stepped through the door, Ethan could tell something was wrong. Lucas, Ethan said gently, watching his son drop his backpack by the door. What happened? Lucas didn't look up. He couldn't. His chest felt tight, his throat raw with the words he'd been holding back for weeks. It's everything, Dad. The school, the students. Owen, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Ethan's face hardened, but his voice remained calm. What did Owen do? Lucas swallowed hard, finally meeting his father's gaze. He's been tormenting me every day. It's not just him. It's the whole school. They treat me like I'm nothing because of where we come from. And today, his voice cracked, and he looked down, blinking back tears. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. I won't let them do this to you, Lucas. I promise. Lucas shook his head, the fear and frustration pouring out. What if it doesn't matter, Dad? What if no one cares what happens to people like us? Ethan's jaw tightened, his anger quietly simmering. It does matter. I care. And we're going to make sure they understand that. The following week, Ethan walked into the Meadowbrook Academy boardroom, flanked by Caleb Donovan. The room was as imposing as ever. Polished mahogany tables, framed portraits of the school's founders lining the walls. The board members, dressed in tailored suits, eyed Ethan with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Gregory Hastings, Owen's father, sat at the head of the table, his expression cool and confident. Mr. Carter, I assume you're here to discuss your grievances. Ethan didn't bother with pleasantries. I'm here to talk about what you did to my family, and how your school is treating my son. Gregory raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Your family? I don't recall Meadowbrook having any unresolved matters with the Carter family. Caleb slid a thick folder across the table. This contains documentation proving that Meadowbrook was built on land that rightfully belonged to the Carter family. Ethan's ancestors were deceived into selling under fraudulent terms, and the school's founders, your predecessors, profited from it. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but Gregory remained unflinching. That was a long time ago, Mr. Donovan. Whatever grievances the Carter family may have had, they're ancient history. We've moved on. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Maybe you have, but I haven't. My son hasn't. And now you're trying to push him out of this school the same way you stole this land from my family. Gregory smirked, unperturbed. Your son isn't suited for Meadowbrook, Mr. Carter. You know it. I know it. He's out of his depth. Ethan's fists clenched, but Caleb placed a hand on his arm, urging him to stay calm. We're not here to discuss Lucas's suitability, Caleb said. We're here to inform you that if this continues, we will be filing a legal claim. We have the evidence to back it up. Gregory's smile faded, replaced by a calculating look. You're making a mistake, Carter. A costly one. But Ethan wasn't backing down. The only mistake I made was not doing this sooner. We'll see you in court. The next day, the phone call started. First, it was a local journalist asking Ethan for a comment on a story they were running about a disgruntled parent. Then, the headlines began to pop up online in the local papers. Father of scholarship student launches baseless attack against Meadowbrook Academy. The articles painted Ethan as a bitter man trying to extort money from the prestigious school. Ethan stood in the kitchen, scrolling through the article on his phone, his face pale with anger. They're smearing my name, he muttered under his breath. Lucas, who had been sitting at the table doing homework, looked up in alarm. What are they saying? Ethan handed him the phone, and Lucas read the headline. His heart sank. Dad, they're trying to destroy you. Ethan sighed, sitting down across from him. They're trying to make me back down. But I'm not going to. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that fighting back would be hard, but he hadn't expected it to get so ugly so fast. What if they win? What if they ruin everything? Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. We're not backing down, Lucas. I'm doing this for you. For us. And we're going to see it through. But as the smear campaign continued to spread, Ethan's reputation took a beating. Some of his clients began to pull away, citing concerns about the bad press. And at school, Lucas found himself even more isolated, the whispers and stares becoming unbearable. The library had become Lucas's refuge, the one place where he could escape the hostility of the other students. And more often than not, Emma Parker was there too, her quiet presence a welcome comfort in the chaos of his life. One afternoon, as they sat together, Lucas finally opened up. I don't know how much more of this I can take, he admitted, staring down at his notebook. They're going after my dad now. They're trying to destroy him. Emma looked at him, her expression full of concern. I'm so sorry, Lucas. I had no idea it had gotten that bad. Lucas shrugged, trying to act like it didn't bother him. But the truth was, it was tearing him apart. My dad's trying to fight them. He's doing it for me, but I don't know if it's worth it anymore. Emma was quiet for a moment, then she spoke softly. You know, my mom used to be a lawyer. She handled cases like this sometimes. Maybe I could help. Lucas glanced at her, surprised. What do you mean? Emma hesitated, then leaned in closer. My mom kept some old files, documents about the school, and some of the people who run it. I think there might be something in there that could help your dad. Lucas blinked, taken aback. Why didn't you say something sooner? I didn't know if it would help, Emma said quietly. But now I think it might. That night, Lucas overheard a conversation between his father and Caleb. They were sitting at the kitchen table, speaking in low, tense voices. The smear campaign is working, Caleb said, his tone grim. People are starting to believe the lies. And with your clients pulling out, Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I know. It's getting harder. But I can't just give up. Caleb leaned forward, his voice softening. Ethan, you need to think about what's best for Lucas. If this fight destroys everything you've built. I'm doing this for Lucas, Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. I won't let them win. Not again. Lucas felt a pang of guilt as he listened from the hallway. He had never meant for his father to go through all of this for him. What if this fight really was destroying them? As Caleb left and the apartment fell silent, Lucas made a decision. He couldn't let his father fight this battle alone anymore. He had to find a way to help. The schoolyard was unusually quiet as Lucas made his way through the halls the next morning. Whispers followed him like shadows, the smear campaign against his father casting a heavier weight over his shoulders than ever before. But something in Lucas had shifted since his conversation with Emma. He felt the stirring of resolve, something that pushed him to keep his head up despite everything. As he walked into the cafeteria, he saw Owen Hastings sitting with his group of friends at their usual table. The moment Owen spotted Lucas, a smirk crept across his face. "Well, if it isn't the scholarship kid," Owen sneered, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "How's life as the son of a con artist?" The familiar surge of anger welled up in Lucas, but this time, he didn't look away. He walked straight over to Owen's table, standing tall in front of him. "I'm done with your bullying, Owen." Owen blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting Lucas to confront him. "What did you say?" "I said I'm done. You think you can push me around just because your dad has money? Because you go to some fancy school?" Lucas's voice was steady, louder than it had ever been in that cafeteria. "You're nothing without your father's money, Owen. And you're scared that everyone's going to see that." The room fell into stunned silence. Lucas's words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, Owen didn't have a quick retort. His face reddened with fury, but he couldn't seem to muster a response. "You've been treating people like they're beneath you, but you're the one who's scared," Lucas said, his voice unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of you anymore." Owen stood up, his fists clenched, but the mocking sneer had vanished from his face. He stepped closer to Lucas, but before anything could happen, a teacher appeared at the edge of the cafeteria, calling for order. Lucas turned and walked away, leaving Owen standing in stunned silence, the eyes of the cafeteria still on them. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Caleb Donovan sat in the quiet office of a local law firm. Papers were strewn across the table, each one detailing the complicated legal history of the Carter family's land. Caleb, dressed in his usual sharp suit, was flipping through the documents as Ethan watched intently. "This is it, Ethan," Caleb said, sliding a particularly important document across the table. "This is the proof we need to make our case. We have enough to file a formal legal claim against Meadowbrook Academy." Ethan stared at the papers, his heart pounding. This was what he had been building toward, the moment where they could finally hold the school accountable for what it had done, not only to his family but to his son. But the thought of going up against an institution as powerful as Meadowbrook still made his stomach churn. "Are you sure we can win this?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet but determined. Caleb nodded. "We have a strong case. And the fact that they're trying to smear you in the media shows they're scared. They know we have something real." Ethan exhaled, a mix of relief and fear coursing through him. "Then let's do it. Let's file the claim." Caleb leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. They won't see this coming. The following day, Lucas sat in the library with Emma. Since their first conversation, they had become closer, and Lucas had come to trust her more than anyone else at Meadowbrook. But today, Emma seemed unusually quiet, her fingers nervously flipping through the pages of a book she wasn't reading. "There's something I need to tell you," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about my mom." Lucas frowned, turning to face her. "What about her?" Emma hesitated, then pulled a small, worn folder out of her bag. "My mom used to be a lawyer, and she worked on some cases related to Meadowbrook. She found things. Corruption, embezzlement, things that could destroy the school." Lucas's eyes widened as he took the folder from her, carefully opening it. Inside were old legal documents, emails, and notes from Emma's mother. The more Lucas read, the more his heart raced. These documents were the missing piece of the puzzle, proof that the school, and especially people like Gregory Hastings, had been hiding illegal activities for years. "This is huge," Lucas whispered. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "I didn't know if it would help," Emma said, looking down. "But now I think it's the only way to stop them." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. This information could change everything, but it also put them at risk. If Meadowbrook found out what they had, they would do anything to bury it. "We need to show this to my dad," Lucas said finally. "He'll know what to do." By the end of the week, Ethan's legal claim against Meadowbrook had sent shockwaves through the community. The local media had picked up on the story, and while some outlets painted Ethan as a man fighting for justice, others, particularly those with ties to the school's wealthy donors, labeled him a troublemaker. The headlines screamed for attention. Father of scholarship student sues prestigious academy, Carter family seeks to destroy Meadowbrook, and legal battle over school's land erupts in controversy. At school, the backlash was immediate. Lucas found himself more isolated than ever, with students openly mocking him, even those who had previously ignored him. "Your dad's a fraud," one boy sneered as Lucas passed by in the hallway. "He's just trying to get money." Lucas kept his head down, his heart pounding in his chest. The pressure was mounting, and it felt like the entire world was turning against them. Even teachers seemed to be treating him differently, their once indifferent stares now filled with thinly veiled contempt. That evening, Ethan sat with Lucas at the kitchen table, the weight of the day heavy on both their shoulders. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Ethan said quietly, his hand resting on the stack of legal papers in front of him. "But we're doing the right thing." Lucas nodded, though his stomach churned with uncertainty. "I know. It's just hard." Ethan smiled sadly. "I know it is. But we're not alone in this. We have Caleb, and now we have something else." He glanced at the folder Emma had given them, which now lay on the table between them. "This could change everything," Lucas said. Ethan nodded. "It could. But we have to be careful. They're going to fight back harder than ever." A few days later, Ethan received a visitor at their apartment, Gregory Hastings. He stood at the door, his expression cold, his eyes gleaming with calculated menace. "Mr. Hastings," Ethan said warily, stepping outside to meet him. "What are you doing here?" Gregory crossed his arms, his voice low and threatening. "I'm here to give you one last chance to drop this ridiculous claim before things get ugly." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not dropping anything. You stole from my family, and now you're trying to ruin my son's life. I won't let you get away with it." Gregory's smile was thin and dangerous. "You're making a big mistake, Carter. You think you're going to take down Meadowbrook? You think you can take down me? You don't know what you're dealing with." Ethan stood his ground. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I'm not afraid of you." Gregory's eyes flashed with anger. "You should be." Without another word, Gregory turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the doorway, his heart pounding with both fear and resolve. The threat was clear, but so was Ethan's determination. The weight of everything pressed down on Lucas. Sitting at the kitchen table, he watched his father pace back and forth, the lines of stress etched deeper into Ethan's face than he had ever seen. The legal fight, the financial strain, the relentless smear campaign. Everything was taking its toll. "We're losing, Lucas," Ethan said, running a hand through his graying hair. "I thought I could protect you. But this is bigger than I imagined." Lucas looked up from the documents spread across the table, his own frustration simmering beneath the surface. "We can't give up, Dad. We can't let them win." Ethan stopped, his expression one of pained exhaustion. "But they have resources we don't. They're dragging us through the mud in the press, and now they're threatening us personally." Lucas clenched his fists, anger bubbling up. "We have the truth, Dad. We have Emma's documents. If we go public with this, it'll expose them. We can still win." Ethan hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He had wanted to protect Lucas, to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. But his son had grown stronger, more determined. Maybe it was time to let him take the lead. "You really think this is the right move?" Ethan asked, meeting Lucas's gaze. Lucas nodded, his green eyes filled with conviction. "We can't back down now. We have to fight." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way." The next morning, Ethan and Caleb met at Caleb's office, ready to take the next step. The documents Emma had provided were the key to bringing down Gregory Hastings and the corrupt board members who had been running Meadowbrook Academy like their personal fiefdom. "We're going to release these to the media," Caleb said, flipping through the stack of evidence. "This will turn everything around. Once the public sees the level of corruption, they'll have no choice but to take action." Ethan, seated across from Caleb, nodded slowly. "I'm just worried about what this will mean for Lucas. The school might go after him even harder." "We'll protect him," Caleb assured him. "But this is the right move. Hastings has been untouchable for too long. This could finally take him down. With a nod of agreement, Ethan signed the documents that authorized Caleb to release the information. By the end of the day, the local media was buzzing with headlines. Meadowbrook corruption scandal unveiled. Documents reveal financial misconduct by board members. The fallout was swift and brutal. Gregory Hastings found himself the target of an investigation, his name plastered across newspapers and news channels. The school board was forced to hold an emergency meeting, and the Hastings family, once untouchable, now faced the very public collapse of their reputation. At school, Owen Hastings felt the shift almost immediately. He had always been the most popular student, the one everyone looked up to or feared. But now, whispers followed him through the halls, not of admiration, but of disgrace. Did you hear what his dad did? Guess the Hastings family isn't so perfect after all. The words cut through Owen's usual arrogance, and for the first time, he felt the sting of being on the outside. During lunch, he sat alone, his friends having distanced themselves from the scandal. And then, as if to twist the knife further, Lucas walked by. Owen looked up, his face pale with humiliation. "Carter," he muttered, but there was no fight left in his voice. Lucas paused, watching Owen for a moment. The tables had turned, but Lucas didn't feel the sense of victory he had imagined. Instead, he saw a boy who was just as trapped by his father's choices as he had been. Without a word, Lucas continued walking, leaving Owen to grapple with the consequences of his family's downfall. As the legal case against Meadowbrook Academy moved forward, the school board began to panic. They had underestimated Ethan Carter, and now they were facing the real possibility of losing control of the institution. Desperate to avoid complete ruin, they approached Ethan with an offer. Ethan sat across from the board members, his lawyer by his side. Gregory Hastings was noticeably absent, his seat at the table empty as the rest of the board members tried to salvage what was left of their power. "We want to make you an offer, Mr. Carter," one of the board members began, his tone carefully measured. "We'll return the land that was taken from your family, and we'll provide financial compensation for the trouble you've endured." Ethan remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the man continued, "In exchange, we need you to drop the lawsuit. The school's reputation has already taken a hit, and if this case goes to court, it could destroy Meadowbrook entirely. We're asking you to settle this quietly." Ethan glanced at Caleb, then back at the board members. It was tempting. He could secure his family's legacy, get justice for what had been stolen from them, and ensure that Lucas would have a future free from the stigma of the lawsuit. But he knew it wasn't enough. The school had wronged more than just him and Lucas. It had built itself on a foundation of privilege and exclusion, and if he walked away now, nothing would change. "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not going to drop the lawsuit. Meadowbrook needs to be held accountable." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Mr. Carter, you're making a mistake?" "The only mistake was thinking I'd accept your offer," Ethan interrupted. "This isn't just about my family anymore. It's about all the families you've wronged." With that, Ethan stood and walked out, leaving the board to face the consequences of their actions. The final showdown came during a school assembly. Meadowbrook was in chaos, the once unshakable institution now teetering on the edge of collapse. Students and teachers alike were reeling from the scandal, and the tension in the air was palpable as everyone gathered in the grand auditorium. Lucas stood backstage, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. For weeks, he had been silent, letting his father fight the battles. But now, it was his turn. As Principal Waltham began to address the assembly, Lucas stepped forward, his hands shaking. He hadn't planned on speaking, but the words were there, burning inside him. "Excuse me, Mr. Waltham," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I have something to say." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Lucas walked to the front of the stage, his heart racing, but his resolve strong. "For a long time, I felt like I didn't belong here," Lucas began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I thought that because I didn't have the money or the clothes or the status, I didn't deserve to be at this school. But that's not true. No one should be treated like they're less because of where they come from." He glanced at the faces in the crowd, some hostile, some curious, but many nodding in agreement. This school has been built on privilege and exclusion for too long. It's time for that to change. Everyone deserves a chance to succeed, no matter who they are or where they come from. The students in the audience began to murmur in agreement, and Lucas felt a surge of confidence. "I'm not leaving," Lucas said firmly, his voice carrying through the auditorium. "And I'm not backing down. This is our school, too." The applause started slowly, then grew into a roar as more students stood in solidarity with Lucas. For the first time, he felt like he had truly found his place. The room was silent as Gregory Hastings paced in front of the remaining board members. His once confident demeanor had crumbled into something unrecognizable: desperation and fear. The media storm surrounding the corruption scandal had taken its toll, and now the very board that had protected his interests was ready to turn on him. "We can't continue like this," one board member said, his voice shaking slightly. "The school's reputation is in ruins, and parents are threatening to pull their children out." Gregory stopped pacing, glaring at the man. "We've survived worse. Meadowbrook is an institution. This will pass." "No, it won't," came the sharp voice of another board member, an elderly woman with a reputation for being level-headed. "You've dragged us into this mess, Gregory. Your corruption has put everything we've built at risk." Gregory clenched his fists, but before he could respond, the door to the boardroom opened, and the interim principal, Mr. Michaels, entered, his expression grim. "It's over," Michaels said simply, holding up a letter. "We've received an official notice from the district. The board is being dissolved, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you mean, dissolved?" Gregory sputtered. "You can't just—" "We can," Michaels interrupted, his voice firm. "You and several other members are being asked to resign. Meadowbrook is facing a full investigation. It's time for a change." Gregory stood frozen, disbelief etched on his face as the weight of his downfall settled in. The school board, once his fortress, had turned against him. His reign at Meadowbrook was over. A week later, the atmosphere at Meadowbrook Academy was unrecognizable. The once stifling air of elitism had begun to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. Students and teachers alike had witnessed the upheaval of the past months, and now, the school was on the brink of transformation. In the grand auditorium, where so many tense assemblies had been held, Mr. Michaels addressed the entire student body and faculty. He stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, many of them still uncertain about the future. "As you all know," Michaels began, "Meadowbrook Academy is undergoing a period of significant change. We are committed to building a school that no longer upholds the traditions of exclusion and privilege, but one that embraces equality, transparency, and inclusion." There were murmurs of approval throughout the room. "To that end," he continued, "we will be forming a new leadership committee made up of teachers, students, and parents. Together, we will work on creating policies that ensure every student, regardless of background, has the opportunity to thrive here." Lucas sat near the front, his heart swelling with a sense of hope he hadn't felt since his first day at Meadowbrook. He exchanged a glance with Emma, who sat beside him, smiling. This was what they had fought for. Later that day, Lucas was heading to the library when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Lucas." He turned to see Owen standing awkwardly a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive jacket. His usual air of arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Can we talk?" Owen asked, his voice quieter than Lucas had ever heard it. Lucas hesitated, unsure of what to expect, but nodded. They stepped off to the side of the hallway, away from the eyes of passing students. Owen began, looking down at his shoes. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." Lucas raised an eyebrow, taken aback. "Sorry? For what?" "For everything," Owen said, meeting Lucas's eyes. "For the bullying, for how I treated you, for just being a jerk. I didn't realize how much damage I was causing." Lucas crossed his arms, unsure of how to respond. "Why now?" Owen sighed, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "After everything with my dad, I guess I realized I'm not as invincible as I thought. And I saw what it did to you, what I did to you. I was wrong." Lucas studied Owen's face, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all he saw was the boy who had once made his life miserable, now looking genuinely remorseful. "I don't know if I can just forget everything," Lucas said slowly. "But I appreciate the apology." Owen nodded, looking relieved. "I get it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better." Lucas gave him a small nod. "I hope you do." As Owen turned and walked away, Lucas couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. The boy who had once tormented him was finally starting to understand the damage he had done. And while Lucas wasn't ready to forgive and forget, it was a step toward healing. At long last, Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the Meadowbrook Academy grounds, staring out at the land that had once belonged to his family. The garden, overgrown and hidden from view, was still there, a remnant of the Carter estate. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, memories flooding back. The days when his family's name meant something, when this land had been theirs, before it was stolen through deceit and greed. But now, after all these years, he had reclaimed it, and he hadn't needed to tear it all down to do so. Beside him, Mr. Michaels approached, his hands in his pockets as he surveyed the garden. "We're grateful you've decided to work with us on this," Michaels said. "Your input will help ensure that Meadowbrook becomes the inclusive school it should have been all along." Ethan nodded. "I didn't want to destroy the school. I just wanted justice. And you've gotten it," Michaels said, offering a hand. "We're rebuilding Meadowbrook, and your legacy will be part of that." Ethan shook his hand, feeling the weight of years of bitterness and loss begin to lift. He had fought for Lucas, for his family's honor, and for the future of the school. And now, standing on the land that had once been stolen, he knew they had won something far greater than he could have imagined. A few weeks later, the changes at Meadowbrook were well underway. The school had implemented new policies, ensuring that every student, no matter their background, would have access to the same opportunities. The elitist culture that had once dominated the halls was fading, replaced by a spirit of equality and collaboration. As Lucas and Ethan walked through the campus together, they marveled at how much had changed. Students who had once ignored Lucas now waved as they passed, and the tension that had hung over the school was gone. "I can't believe it," Lucas said, shaking his head with a smile. "It's like a completely different place." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's because it is. We fought for this." Lucas looked up at his father, his heart swelling with pride. "We did it, didn't we?" Ethan smiled, resting a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Yeah, we did. And you were the one who made it happen." Lucas shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed by the praise. "I just stood up and told the truth, and that's what changed everything," Ethan said. "You showed everyone that they didn't have to be afraid anymore." As they continued walking, father and son in step, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. They had stood together, not just for their family, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of privilege. Meadowbrook Academy was a new place now, built on a foundation of truth and equality. And as Lucas looked out over the campus, he knew that their victory would resonate for years to come.